Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of our panelists for their efforts at assisting us in the issue of transparency for this $787 billion stimulus package. I voted against this package, and I voted against it because I thought that there were no achievable standards in the bill, there were no achievable goals, that it was ill-defined, that the spending was going to be misdirected, and that the deficits that were going to be generated would have a negative impact on our ability to create jobs. Lo and behold, the President is now saying that he's concerned that our deficits, created in part by this almost $1 trillion stimulus package, might impact our ability to create jobs in the future. I appreciate the transparency that you're providing because we're able to take a look at whether or not this was ill-defined with no achievable goals, no achievable standards. We're actually able to look at how the money is spent and make a decision as to whether or not this should have been done, and hopefully be able to make a decision whether or not in the future we should do something like this, which I think would be very unfortunate if we continued to try to spend in this manner where there's no accountability on the spending, it's not directed and targeted toward job creation, and just generates additional deficits. Mr. Miller, you had said about the jobs created on the education side, and I have two things I want to comment on that. One, we were reminded by the other side of the aisle that we should deal with facts, so let's talk about some of those facts. According to the Wall Street Journal and Jonathan Karl of ABC News, they looked at the job creation figures on the side of education, and they found, for example, that Head Start in Augusta, Georgia, claimed 317 jobs were created by a $790,000 grant. In reality, Mr. Karl reports that the money went toward a one-off pay hike for 317 employees, not creating 317 jobs. And that would be in your numbers you report to us today.
No, actually, Head Start's out of the Health and Human Services, out of HHS. It's not a Department of Education program.
It's certainly out of the aggregate number of jobs that are created, and it's an example of the claim of a job created. Well, there isn't a job created. There were, in fact, pay hikes that were provided, according to Mr. Karl. My concern is in the education sector and in the government sector is that as these monies are used in this manner, which obviously the bill and the Act permits, that we're creating a cliff then for these government agencies as we're providing a one-time subsidy for increased cost for their operation. When they go to that next year where the stimulus is not there, the gap is going to be greater between their revenue and their operational costs, creating perhaps a more difficult problem and one where they're going to turn to the Federal Government for additional assistance. In my community in Dayton, Ohio, stimulus dollars were used for the paving of Main Street, and my concern is that although in the transportation sector we created jobs or jobs were assisted in that project moving forward, by the time that the project began till it ended, there were probably less jobs along Main Street than were there before. This is not the type of spending that's going to create the type of sustainable jobs that we need in certainly a state like Ohio that is struggling so much and needing job production. Now, in looking at this issue of the phantom congressional districts, according to the recovery.org site, in my congressional district, 186,371,562 dollars were spent creating 385.4 jobs in my congressional district. Translates out to roughly about slightly less than $500,000 being spent in trying to create a job. And then on the phantom districts, the number is the same. It claims that there were 11 jobs that were saved, over $5 million that were spent in phantom congressional districts that do not exist, translating to about $482,000 per job, not the type of investment that we want to continue. Now, what strikes me about the phantom congressional districts is that Ed Pound, the Director of Communications for the Obama administration's Recoverment.org, said about this whole mess, "Who knows, man? Who really knows?" That's his quote in the Wall Street Journal today. Mr. Devaney, I want to know if you disagree with Mr. Pound.
Well, I certainly wouldn't have said it that way, and I'll speak to him when I get back to the office. The fact is that the information may in fact be true about the jobs and the money spent, and the simple error has been the wrong congressional district. And we think we can fix that next time out, but the accuracy of the data other than the congressional districts.
Would that
examined.
include, excuse me, would that include the jobs in Augusta, Georgia, for the 317 jobs created, where apparently everyone just got a raise instead of real jobs being created?
I don't know why the recipient reported it that way, and it may have been the state of Georgia that reported it.
Because as you've said to us, and I appreciate your honesty, you're merely reporting what these people have told you. There really is no transparency. We don't really know how they spent this money. And apparently that accountability didn't occur in the beginning of the approval of them receiving this money either. I appreciate what you're doing, but it doesn't give us the type of information to ever believe that jobs have been created or saved.
Having said that, sir, and I don't disagree with you, but at this point in time, the fact that we have transparency allows us to see these anomalies and to understand if they occurred or didn't. The old non-transparent way, which is the way the government has acted in the past, you never would have seen it.
I agree with you, and I thank you for your efforts in that.
Thank you. And